The Train to the Past, Series 2, Part 3. Written and read for you by Emily Z. Prologue Jack. Flame. Jack growled in a warning voice to the fire-breathing tiger cat. Leave the fireflies alone. Flame whimpered in protest and bounded up to walk beside Jack. Jack's feet were tired. He couldn't see where he was going. He was cold, and the occasional bursts of fire Flame and Raven let out didn't help as much as he would have liked, though he was grateful for their warmth. Raven, he begged, switching over to dragon tongue. The growls and grunts and roars confused him. He didn't mean to say, "Don't breathe fire in the cave," but it would come out as, "Be nice to my brother," which would be disastrous after mixing up a few sounds. "Carry me, please." Raven was so much taller and could see above the tall trees blocking most of the moonlight. He also didn't forget the fact that one of Raven's footsteps were equivalent to 5 of his own. Raven roared quietly in response and gripped Jack's waist with his talons, lifting him onto his back. Jack clutched onto one of the black spikes and, rocked by the rhythmic pattern of the dragon's footsteps, fell into a deep sleep. He dreamed of the day he went through the time-visiting door, of the day he saw what really happened to his parents. "Mom!" he tried to shout, but it was like opening his mouth and talking through water. "Dad!" Again his call was muffled. His parents didn't even look in his direction. His parents were standing in a small clearing of oak trees, with the sun slipping in and out of clouds. It was nothing like Blue Moon's Lake, but there was something about the small forest that almost made it just as beautiful. It was probably that the air was so clean, and the leaves on the trees that seemed to glitter with the morning dew. The grass was lime green, and dandelions poked out in random patterns along the green. Watching his parents get captured and tortured in this beautiful, peaceful clearing that wasn't supposed to have any violence in it whatsoever was the worst thing he had to endure in his entire life. 3 hooded figures jumped out from behind the shadows of the swaying trees. One of them grabbed Jack's mother and pinned her arms behind her back easily. The other 2 cornered his father. His dad could fight, a little, but this was an unfair battle, 2 against 1. And his father didn't spend so much time living with animals to know how to communicate. His mother yanked one arm out of her attacker's grasp, and Jack flinched as he saw the red scratch marks that had been left on her smooth skin. Watching his parents being hurt was as though he was the one being tortured. Every time one of them slashed and jabbed at his father, it was like a hole was being blasted into Jack. It was worse than losing himself, worse than the decision to run away. His mother suddenly turned around and looked up, as if she knew that Jack was watching. She held out her hand, fingers spread wide, as if gripping for his hand. With one more cry of what sounded like, "William! Jack!" her attacker dragged her on the ground. "Mom! Dad!" Jack screamed until his voice was hoarse, even though he knew he couldn't be heard. His father twisted his head around too, and Jack reached out to him, instinctively taking a step forward, as if his parents that he had to share could run around and hug him one last time. His foot stepped onto thin air. There was nothing under him anymore. His leg felt numb, and faster it began to spread to the rest of his body. He let it. There was no point in fighting. No point in anything. So he let himself flow and drift away from the world, let himself change, let himself be broken into a million pieces. The back of his t-shirt hooked onto a gear and yanked him away from the door, from the colors, from the fantasy, nearly choking him in the process. Jack fell backwards onto his knees and crawled over to a cracked mirror he'd found on his way here, and he felt a sinking feeling in his chest. His shirt had saved him, but not fast enough. He stared at the boy in the dirty mirror. The boy's eyes were dark blue, almost black, and a teeny bit smaller than before. He had straight black hair and long bangs that hung over his eyes in a graceful arc. He looked taller, felt taller, with lighter skin. And he felt different too. He felt more alone, and less enthusiastic about everything. He felt the perky side of him drain away like water flowing from a tap. He gazed at the unfamiliar face, wondering if this was a dream. And then, for what felt like the first time in 9 years, a tiny tear trickled down his cheek, as if it were afraid to be there. He ran, and the tears began to fall more freely. He cried silently, not only for himself, but for his parents too, for everything that had been taken away from him, for everyone he had ever lost. Jack jerked awake, still on Raven's back, his head covered in the cold sweat. He breathed quickly, his heart trying to pound its way out of his chest. He'd forgotten how he used to look. It had been too long from when he'd last seen his face. But as he was touching William that day, it all came flooding back. His looks, his old self, and the most painful memory of all, the memory that he'd forced himself to forget, the memory that he hated but needed at the same time, the memory that he'd buried away under millions of others. He'd almost been successful, but the memory had resurfaced after the dream, and now it seemed real as ever, as if it had just happened. He'd been so freaked out by the dream that when he finally looked up, he realized that they were already there. Flame was chasing butterflies and pouncing on every dandelion in sight. And here Jack stood, looking at the place he'd seen through the door. The place where his parents were taken. The train to the past. What do we do? I finally say, breaking the silence that Jack has left us with. Conductor? I wheel around to look at William, but he's pacing back and forth, his perfect uniform now covered with twigs and dirt and ash. I have a lot of unanswered questions, and with nothing better to do, I start. Why did I have to fall asleep in order to get onto the train to the past? William stares blankly ahead and answers in a flat voice.
It's just so it's to transport you, and easier to hide at location. And it's better than erasing your memories every time.
Why is that pin so important? I ask, pointing on the jeweled shape pinned across his chest.
It represents the role of conductor,
he says, unpinning it for me to look at. It looks like a clover or a flower with 4 petals of different colors, and set in the center of the flower/clover is a tiny ruby train.
The white diamond represents air, the blue sapphire is water, green emerald is land, and the purple amethyst means, well, no one knows yet, but I suspect my dad figured out before he... Never mind. And the gold weaving between the jewels show the elements uniting or something.
I have one last, very important question. How did the train to the past start? William sighs and gestures for me to walk away from the others until we're out of earshot. That was, unexpected, I tell him, watching as he sits under the shade of a purple willow-like tree.
Do you know how the train to the past began?
He asks in a low, barely audible whisper. I can sense that something's about to happen, and I shake my head. He takes a deep breath, and I sit down next to him. I feel like I'm 5 years old all over again, leaning in eagerly toward my parents for a bedtime story.
A long time ago,
William begins, his voice growing deeper and more whispery, adding a magical feeling to the story.
A very long time ago, over 300 years ago, there lived a very intelligent boy.
A shiver goes up my spine, even though the story has only just started.
The boy was very curious, and he liked answers. If someone couldn't answer one of his questions, he'd find that answer himself. He loved learning too. By the age of 10, though he may not have been as experienced, he was already considered the smartest person in the village, not only for his knowledge and facts, but also for his reasoning and theories.
I lean my head back against the tree bark. Hey, might as well get comfy.
Naturally, like any normal person, he grew into a man. But there was still one question that had stayed with him his entire life. A question he had not yet been able to answer. What happened to your past self after you grew old?
He pauses to take a breath.
So he set off in search of an answer, or at least come up with a possible theory that would satisfy him. He was still searching, and about to give up hope, when he stumbled across a lake. It was all in shades of blues and purples, like nature itself painted the scene using only 2 types of colors.
I give an involuntary shudder. Blue Moon's Lake.
He named this place Blue Moon's Lake. The moon was his favorite part of nature, and he loved the nighttime. It was the night of the 2nd full moon that month, a blue moon, when he found this lake. And his answer.
There's something I never noticed about William. When his voice gets deep and magical, like it is now, he makes anything he says sound so much more real and alive and ancient and meant to be taken seriously, like...
There, in front of his eyes, tucked in a grove of willows, was a train. Of course he didn't know that. All he knew was that the train was massive, and he sensed, don't ask me how, that this was no ordinary train.
He swallows.
He climbed aboard, and the train gave a small rumble. Then it began to move, slowly tilting up into the air. The guy ran forward, taking very little time to admire the things around him, and eventually found his way into the control room.
Another pause, probably to draw out the suspense. It works, and I lean eagerly toward him.
There was no one there, The train was steering itself. He suddenly noticed something else that was strange. The train was traveling very, very smoothly. He ran to the nearest window, looked out, and discovered that the train was flying, or so it seemed, through the air.
I second a breath. I'm not sure anyone can understand that guy more than I can.
His head was crowded with questions already when he heard quiet voices coming from down the hall. He ran toward the sound, curiosity winning over his sense of survival. He entered a room filled with passengers. To his surprise, he sees himself. Many versions of the child, each one older than the last. His present selves, and men who are older than him, ranging from 30 all the way to 90.
He pauses again.
As he was deep in conversation with his future selves, the train gave a sudden lurch. He figured it was a change in the airflow, and that it was nothing to worry about. When the shaking didn't stop, though, he grew worried. He ran back to the control room and saw the emergency light flashing, signaling for him to evacuate the train.
My eyes widen. At least my first trip on the train to the past wasn't as bad as that.
Refusing to abandon the passengers, he grabbed at random levers and pressed random buttons, trying to make sense of this machine. After a few desperate attempts, the train steadied.
William's brow wrinkles, deep in thought. Finally, he says,
The specific details are lost to history, but this man was named the conductor, given the responsibility of showing people, kids especially, their futures, and reminding them of their past.
Wow! A voice that is certainly not mine whispers. I didn't realize my eyes were closed until I opened them and find younger Laura sitting next to me. I've never heard that story before, she continues. William's eyes flash open too.
It's not very well known, passed on from parents to children in our family. I wonder when I gave you permission to share that tale with Laura,
The conductor muses, sitting on a large smooth rock rather than the ground.
I'm the conductor now.
William says with an air of authority that shows that he's been waiting to say that basically since the day he became conductor.
And as conductor, I think we should just keep walking until we find the train. We can't get more lost than we already are.
I give him my best. Are you kidding me right now? Look. Or, I suggest, we can look into the lake and find a solution.
Why didn't I make you conductor instead of William?
His grandfather mutters under his breath. We all start walking. We don't have to walk far until the trees surround the massive lake. Elegant, letting the peaceful feeling of calm sink into me, and before my eyes, a map begins to form on the lake's surface. I don't know if the others are seeing the same thing, but the route becomes more detailed the longer I look. I see what trees I need to go around and where the area is covered in slippery mud. Let's go, I announce. I know where to go. We march forward, picking our way through the mud, with me leading the way, and young Laura behind. Wait. An idea comes to me. Hey, Laura, I have an idea. She takes a step back hesitantly. Come on, this isn't crazy. She crosses her arms, a nervous expression on her face. Fine, let's hear it. We should change your name. We can't keep calling you younger Laura forever. That's not a bad idea, actually. Yay, I cheer. Let's brainstorm. I look at her carefully. Strawberry red blonde hair. Pale skin. Dark brown eyes. It's hard to think of any name for her other than Laura. Since I've proven to be really bad at names, I turn to William for suggestions.
I can't think of any.
He says, That's totally a lie. The look on his face implies that he can think of a lot. Not falling for it, conductor. What are your ideas?
Well, okay, fine. I was thinking of a lot.
I knew it.
And I think I'm trying to decide between Eva or Evelyn, I guess. Sophia or Hannah.
Those are nice names, better than any of the ones I've come up with. I don't know how it happens, but a name can look like a person, and younger Laura looks like all of these. Okay then, let's have a vote. Hands up for Hannah. William raises his hand. Who votes for Sophia? Former conductor, he needs a new name too, puts his hand up. Up to you, I say.
Yeah.
William agrees.
It's your new name anyway.
Evelyn, Sophia, Hannah. Evelyn, Sophia, Hannah. Evelyn, Sophia, younger Laura mutters to herself, saying the names and trying them out. This is so hard, she finally bursts out. I wish I could have every one of these names. Have every. Every. A from Hannah, V-E from Eva, R from Laura, I from Sophia. Avery! I exclaim. Your new name can be Avery.
We should get Laura back to her family now. Did you tell them where you are?
William's grandfather asks, ruining the celebration. I fish my phone out of my pocket and stare at the frantic text from my mom. Oops. Well, what was I supposed to do? I wonder aloud. Do you guys think I would be in bigger trouble if I didn't reply? Or if I tell them I went to the lake from all the fairy tales, met William's evil brother, almost got burned to death, and am now currently lost in a giant forest? We're not lost. There's a train, Avery tells me. Avery, Avery, Avery. I love her new name. And anyways, I'm Laura. We dash aboard the train, and it feels great to be surrounded by the familiar walls I helped to build. I sink onto a soft, feathery bed and close my eyes. I am never going to want to ride a normal train ever again. I feel the familiar tingling sensation of the head of the train rising into the air, hear the train whistle, and smile. Epilogue. Max. Max rubbed the rose pendant dangling from his neck again and again. He was pacing across the floor of his room, waiting for Laura to return. She had run off with William on an epic quest without him and hadn't bothered to text or call. Why give him the necklace if he wasn't going to be included in any of their adventures? Why tell him about the train if he wasn't allowed on it? Why give Laura a phone if she wasn't going to tell her family everything? He sat down on the bottom of his bunk bed, his chin in his hands. Jewel, the family's cat, jumped onto his lap and he absent-mindedly began to stroke her fur. Max stared at the pile of birthday presents. More than half were unwrapped, and he loved all the new toys and science sets. But the present he'd ripped open first and loved most was the rose necklace that granted him access aboard the train to the past. I wanted an adventure too, he thought angrily. Laura's not even the adventure-y type. Why does she get to have all the fun? Besides, it's my birthday today, and A light thud sounded from outside his window. A giant train circled overhead. The thud was caused by his older sister jumping out the train door, landing lightly on the grass. The train hovered a few feet off the ground, the door open. Max smiled, checked that his necklace was still in place, slipped his shoes on, and bolted out the door. Max, his mother called from the kitchen. Where are you going? His mind immediately began ticking off the possible excuses he could tell his mom. Something that would let them know he would be gone for a while, like Laura, but not something unbelievable. Going to see Laura. Then we might get to the park. Is that okay? Also, I forgot to tell you, but Noah asked me if I wanted to sleep over at his house. Sure, Max. Be sure to tell your dad about the sleepover. Do you have everything packed? That was the first idea that came to mind, but the real answer flashed in his head. I'm going to sneak aboard the train to the past. The end. Thank you for listening. I hope you have enjoyed The Trains to the Past, Series 2, Part 3. Links to the rest of the story are in the description section below. Please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share this video with family and friends. Series 2, Part 4, coming soon.